that's just simply that's an unblocker issue. Leadership is actually not going to be management at all. It's going to be leadership. And to me, leadership has very little to do with what are your numbers, but more importantly, what blockers do you have inside of your work, and how can I open those up for you? And the vast majority of those those issues have nothing to do with the actual mechanics of work. It is, I'm going through some difficult issues with my wife right now.
Welcome to the Break Free Podcast. I am your host, David Mancilla. Today we have with us Liam Martin. Brother, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, David. I am so excited to be here. And I just have to tell everyone beforehand, if they're seeing me and or listening to me, I'm actually in my my mother's place right now out in the countryside, which is why you see this really nice little, fireplace here and the weird walls.
Beautiful. It looks actually very nice.
Yeah, it's very homey.
Liam, tell me, where were you born? Where do you live? And what do you do for a business?
So I currently live in Montreal, Canada, and I have a couple businesses, timedoctor.com and staff.com, which are both time tracking tools for remote teams. And about 5 years ago, I also started Running Remote, which is the largest conference on remote work, where we teach people how to build and scale, in my opinion, remote businesses that are remote by choice and not necessarily remote because they had to switch remote during the pandemic.
Did you know that I started my business with that hypothesis?
I did not know that, actually. Yeah. That's fantastic. There was a really great group of people. So back in 2019, when we ran the last physical version of Running Remote, we had 750 people attend the conference. And that was the largest conference on remote work. And it was such a small community of people that said, I want to have more freedom in my life. I want to be able to work wherever I want, whenever I want. And I also want the employees that work inside of that company to have that same capability as well. Fast forward to 2022, and the world has obviously changed with regards to remote work, but that same core nucleus of people are still there. And those are the group that I really love talking to, because they can teach the next big generation of people that have just gotten a taste of remote work what it can really be.
So I grew up as a software developer. I started my own business in 1995. I almost went bankrupt in 1997, so I had to go get a job. But after the years of going through the corporate ladder until I became a leader in large companies managing software teams, I remember when the ISDN technology came up. To give you an idea, ISDN lines were 128K up and down. And only companies like Bell Canada had the luxury to have them because it was like $20,000 a month to have one.
Sure.
And when that line came and we could actually do audio, we couldn't do video yet, but we could do it. I'm like, oh my God, this is the beginning of something amazing. By 2004, the internet was so fast in those terms that I thought people shouldn't need to come to work, especially programmers and network analysts. We should be able to do this from home. And I was spending about 3 hours a day commuting to my office, right?
Wow.
So when I started my business in 2005, I'm like, you know what? I know this is going to work. And I know I can add a lot of value to my clients by saving so much in rent and everything else. So since that date, my first two developers were remote in Canada. And then I hired people in Costa Rica, Argentina. And funny enough, though, I always had an office because I grew up in the corporate world. So I always rented an office, but it was 2-3 people in the office and then everybody else working from home.
Yeah, we had we still do actually to this day. We have an office in Las Vegas, Nevada. My business partner is from Sydney, Australia, and I'm from Montreal, Canada. We have an office in Las Vegas, and we're a US corporation, ironically. But it's funny that we were booking this next version of the Running Remote conference, which is happening May 17th in Montreal, Canada. And the venue that we booked was quite nervous because they did some due diligence on us and they found out that effectively our corporate headquarters was a PO box, right? It was a small room with like one desk in it. And I had to sit them down for a moment and said, so number one, we've paid you preemptively. But number two, the conference is called Running Remote. It's about remote businesses, right? We don't have an office, and it just didn't process in their minds. So even today, I think there's a lot of the world that's got to kind of catch up to what you figured out back in 2004.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Right now, it's still 90% of my staff is remote. Now we have over 60 people in about 9 countries. And
Wow.
now the world is finally catching up. But I've been
Mm-hmm.
free since then because now I could actually, not really free because I was still, when I was growing the business, I lost my sense of freedom because of, trying to achieve. But I remember in 2011, I realized I could actually work from whatever I want. So I started taking these things called mini retirements, where basically I was working remotely from anywhere in the world. So I was working from Thailand, from Europe, from South America,
Mm-hmm.
always coming back in the summers in Canada, summers and falls. But it's funny because I gave freedom to my staff, but I didn't have the freedom to myself because I still was stuck in the
Sure.
old paradigm, right?
Right.
And then COVID
Yeah.
hit, brother, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, so February of 2020, 4% of the US workforce was working remotely. And by March, it was 45% of the US workforce. A complete transition of work, unlike anything that we've seen before. Probably the earliest example that you could date back to that would compare would be the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution took 80 years, and we did that in March. So it was a complete transition of everything that we knew about work. And I think that this really still has not hit everyone to the degree to which they understand the just massive shift that's currently occurred, where right now about 33% of the US workforce is currently working remotely. And that looks like that's going to be the base amount where we're going to start to go and see that move back up in the opposite direction. Effectively, everyone on planet Earth has had a taste of remote work. And I'm very interested to see what the next 18 to 36 months is going to bring inside of work.
Well, you know that um, people with COVID, it was an awakening. A lot of people realized that their jobs were not suited for them. So it's been a mass exodus in changing jobs and careers for people. And companies like Shopify, for example, they bought a big building here in Uptown Waterloo, and it's being empty. And now they just send an ultimatum saying we are not going back to the office. They just go to the people that go to the office is just because they want to, but it's not because they have to. And Shopify is the largest company in Canada. You know that?
Yeah, Toby's been a mentor of mine for about 15 years. And I remember him about 5 years ago telling me, I wish we could actually take our company remote, but the board would never let us do it. And of course, COVID actually gave everyone that opportunity to be able to say, you can go digital first, which is actually Toby's interpretation of what he defines as remote. And I think that when you see those types of companies move remote, Shopify, Coinbase, GitLab, GitHub, all of these massive technology companies that are worth, 50, 100, $200 billion in the case of Shopify, you're really seeing a horse and buggy versus a Model T moment. You're seeing, regardless of whatever, whether remote work is good or bad, it is actually a more efficient model to extract value from a corporation. And I think that this is a very exciting time because I think in the next 10 years, you're probably going to see half of the S&P 500 as remote first companies, not even because they chose to, although I think the majority will. It's because it's actually a more efficient model. It's a Model T versus a horse and buggy. Even though you love your horse, one day you had to kind of take her out in the back of the barn and take out the car.
Yeah, once you realize that it's horrible to clean horse shit, then you're going
Right.
to the car.
Exactly.
Liam, tell me, how did you get into all these businesses? Let's go back to high school. What were you doing on your last year of high school, and what did you decide to do after that?
So I was actually I was a pair skater. So I was the guy that lifted the girls, and I ended up competing nationally. I actually went to the national championships in Hamilton, which is probably close to where you are if you're around Waterloo. And there I ended up breaking my knee, which was really unfortunate. And I was a carded athlete. And then when you get that type of an injury, they cut your funding and you're effectively out into the real world. That turned into a relatively successful university career because I had the discipline from sports that enabled me to actually just outwork everyone else. It wasn't that I was any smarter. It was just that I put 4 hours a day into study. And then off of that, I ended up going to grad school. Actually, I ended up teaching my first ever class at grad school. A lot of people don't know that first and second year university classes are not actually taught by professors. They're just taught by graduate students, of which I was one. I started with 300 students, ended up with less than 200, and the worst academic reviews in the history of the department. I remember
what were you teaching?
I was teaching sociology. I was actually teaching criminology specifically inside of sociology. And I remember walking into my supervisor's office and I said, I don't think I'm very good at this. And he said, no, you are not. And then I said, okay, so what do you think I should do with my life? And he said, well, you got to get pretty good at this teaching thing before you get to do anything fun inside of academia. So 6 weeks later, I threw a master's thesis under his door and I was out into the real world. And that turned into my very first business that was remote, which was around 2007, 2008, which was an online tutoring business. So that enabled me to be able to actually get twice as many tutoring hours into a workday, as opposed to commuting from spot to spot for the students, which was a really successful model for me.
What technology were you using back then?
I was using Skype, and before that, actually, I did do some kind of remote work, and we were using IRC, Internet Relay Chat, which was easily that was what everyone was using back in the very, very old school, which actually is still used today. I didn't know this, but there are some people that still use IRC chat even at this point. But yeah, to me, it was Skype. It worked about 70% of the time. 30% of the time it wouldn't really work. And that was just because the infrastructure wasn't there yet, right? So we were at a point where that infrastructure was just trying to coalesce, and all the fiber that had been laid 10 years previous hadn't really been connected all together properly. Now, I can run a 4K Zoom call basically to anyone on planet Earth. And with like Starlink, Elon Musk's satellite system, I think within the next 36 months, we're probably going to have every corner of planet Earth connected beautifully. But at that point, it was a very, very different world, which actually comes down to the core thesis of the book that I have been spending the last year and a half writing with HarperCollins about the difference between remote pioneers and the kind of like the pandemic panickers that happened over the last 2.5 years. The big difference between the two of those is what I call asynchronous management, the ability to be able to manage people without actually interacting with them directly. Remote first pioneers were amazing at that skill. And unfortunately, I think the vast majority of remote companies right now are simply recreating the office instead of giving people true remote work.
Yeah, actually, you touch a great point. I spent the majority of the last, I will say, 12 years implementing a beautiful remote culture, because that's the hardest, because you don't see people day to day. How do you do that? I actually wrote software. I have an application called HubLinked, which is helping us since 2013, actually is helping us unite everybody as one family. It's almost like a water cooler, right? So where you can just talk about life, talk about work, talk about everything in a very private and inspiring way.
Right. Very cool.
And also important retreats. I run at least one big retreat a year where we all get together and meet with, like, I have people in Canada, USA, Central America, South America. I have people in Spain. Now I have people in Philippines. And it's so important to do the face-to-face too, to build the culture. And also the onboarding, the training. My VP of operations, he runs meetings on Fridays where, we just have a couple of beers and talk about sports, for example, right? It's so important to keep the culture, right?
Absolutely. I think for me, the future of leadership is actually not going to be management at all. It's going to be leadership. And to me, leadership has very little to do with what are your numbers, but more importantly, what blockers do you have inside of your work and how can I open those up for you? And the vast majority of those those issues have nothing to do with the actual mechanics of work. It is, I'm going through some difficult issues with my wife right now, or I'm having, the family dog died and my kids are really having a difficult time of it. Or I just had a second newborn and I'm completely overloaded and I can't actually get to work and do the work that I'm very passionate about. That's just simply that's an unblocker issue. And that's really talking about the EQ side of the business as opposed to focusing on, how many lines of code did you write this week? Quite, that's quite inconsequential once you actually create all of those measurements and instrument them in a way that is quantifiable and automated. So as an example, everyone inside of the company has a core longitudinal number that they need to hit a target, and it's usually processed automatically. So at any point, I can see the 150 people in the company and all their targets and whether they're on target, off target, or or might possibly not hit their target for the quarter. And I can just very clearly see it, and it's all created asynchronously. I don't have to talk to anybody about whether or not they're on target. They know and I know.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, because now you're using technology to create the accountability, which is one of my the successes in my business is I know that the process will set you free, and that's the first thing that I train on people when they get onboarded. We have this beautiful, optimized, award-winning process where we know whether we're going to be on target or not before we miss it, so we can have something, we can do something about it before we get into trouble, right? And that's why we very rarely fail on projects, because we know, because of the process, and the process is supported by technology. But it's still a business process. It's still a people's process. So that's what we have, like our leaders, when we train our leaders, they are the most important part, because they need to teach these people. And by the way, not everybody is got to work from home. The policy that we have at work is that if you feel too isolated or you're still feeling like the pressure, you can always go to a co-working location, right? And then meet other people. They might not work with you in the same company, but you're in proximity with other people, right?
Yeah, I love that the media has used the term working from home instead of remote work, because when I think about what we've done over the last 2 years, we moved people from working at the office to working from home, but those are both places. Mm-hmm. And remote work is really about having the freedom and flexibility to work wherever you want. So you can work from home, from an office, from a co-working space, from a coffee shop. You can work on a beach if you want. I don't suggest that, by the way. You get a lot of sand in your laptop and it's very problematic. But you can work wherever you do your best work, right? Yeah. And that's the thing that I think the vast majority of people have not recognized with COVID remote work, I guess you can call it, which is there was this scary virus outside that just kept everyone disconnected from each other. Remote workers don't necessarily disconnect from each other in that way. They have deep and rewarding lives, but just some of those interactions don't necessarily happen with their coworkers. It happens with other kind of layers and networks of people that they socialize with inside of their work world and their lives, which I find incredibly exciting. I'm here at my mother's place, and I'm able to hang out here with my newborn daughter and still do work, which is really exciting.
It's beautiful. Have you ever had a full-time job? And how long did that last?
Well, I have had actually a couple full-time jobs. They didn't last too long. I've been fired or quit from pretty much every job that I've tried to do. That's actually one of the reasons why I ended up recognizing that I should be embracing entrepreneurship. The longest one I ended up having was I sold water coolers door to door as a door-to-door salesman. And it was a great business because I ended up figuring out this hack, which was we were selling to consumers, like literally 1 unit water coolers to one home. And sometimes you'd get lucky and you could sell 2 water coolers to a house. But to be honest with you, you didn't really need 2 water coolers in a house. But then I realized, well, if I go to a big office building, I can actually sell like 40 water coolers. And so I started going to these office buildings, and I ended up becoming the best sales rep in the country very, very quickly, because I was selling 40 to 50 water coolers 2 to 3 times a week. And then they came back to me and they said, hey, so you're actually selling commercially. You can't sell commercially. We have a completely separate department that does that. You can only sell to homes. And I thought that was really stupid, because I said, well, I'm making way more money. I said, can you switch me over to the commercial team? And they said, no, this isn't even part of our business. And so instead of stopping that, which was very stupid, I instead wrote out 40 purchase orders. So instead of like doing one purchase order for 40 water coolers, I'd write out 40 separate purchase orders. And that worked for another month. And then they ended up firing me because they realized that wasn't. But again, that just boils down to I didn't realize that I was entrepreneurial. And if you're listening to this and something like that has happened to you, you probably are an entrepreneur, and you should definitely start working for yourself, because you will not be able to work for other people that effectively.
Yeah, it's a good sign. That happened to me too. When you start realizing that the rules at work are not working and you have a better way of doing things and you're always clashing against the norm, it's a great sign that you need to be on your own, right?
Yes,
absolutely. It took me 10 years to figure it out, though. It was a long time for me, 10 years. But I'm glad I finally did it, and that's why we're successful in business. I run 7 businesses now, because once you learn how to manage one, you can just do other ones, right? And become co-creator with other entrepreneurs, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's just. I can't remember who gave me this quote, but it was either be dominated by your own process or build your own, right?
Exactly.
So be enslaved by another process or build your own process. You've got 2 choices. You can do A or B. I think that building your own process is infinitely more difficult, but if you can't take being enslaved by someone else's process, you have to build your own. It's the only way for you to succeed.
By the way, there's a big distinction. When you're an entrepreneur, you're enslaved by the process of somebody else. But when you are an employee, you're liberated by that process.
Sure. Yes.
Because if
absolutely.
Your human nature is to actually follow the process, then you feel free. If you get somebody that their nature is to actually follow a process, you get them to build their own, they fail miserably and they will never be happy. And the uncertainty will kill them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a thesis, an internal company thesis, which is don't ask me what to do, tell me what you did. And so if anyone comes to us and says, hey, what do you think we should do in this situation, without actually providing options, or even better, I chose option A, but I had option B and C. Do you think I made the right decision? The people that just come to me without taking action are usually people that don't end up in the company that long, because the ability to be frozen by inaction is one of those things that the vast majority of people, particularly in remote first companies, we have team members in 43 different countries all over the world. We cannot speak to the vast majority of those people synchronously. We have to operate asynchronously, and they have to make their own independent decisions on almost everything.
And if they don't, the whole thing paralyzes, right?
Absolutely, exactly. That's it.
What business did you jump into right after your last full-time job?
Well, so after that full-time job, I actually ended up starting a sporting goods company, which was pretty interesting, actually. I ended up selling like skate guards, and over my summers, I was making tons of money. I think I made 50 grand one summer, as an example, making skate guards for somebody who was like 19 years old. That was great. And then I actually that business ended up falling apart, because I learned a very serious lesson, which was when you sell to middlemen, when you sell to retailers, they can actually lower the price. So if you don't have a very locked in manufacturer suggested retail price that you have a contract with, then they can set the price to whatever they want to. And when I got everyone to try to buy again the very next year, it ended up falling apart. And this was before Shopify or anything like that. I had to build my own website. Online sales were like a very small percentage of your overall funnel. And then off that, I ended up going into university. So it was literally from the door-to-door sales to sporting goods company, which ended up making me a lot more money than the door-to-door sales and a lot less stressful. And then went to school, and then ended up going back into entrepreneurship after grad school.
What did you graduate from?
I graduated from McGill in sociology.
Sociology.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So what was the first business that actually set you free when you realized I can actually make a living out of this?
Well, it was definitely the tutoring company. But inside of that, I was spending a lot of time on the management of that business, and really kind of reinforced the need for operations. So I also think entrepreneurship, you have to be very egoless and recognize what you're good at and what you're not good at. And I was not good at operations. So I was working 16-hour days, but I was probably putting 4 hours into the stuff that I was good at and 12 hours into the stuff that I wasn't good at, because it just took me 3 times as long to be able to do it. So I remember actually, I chipped one of my teeth in my back molars, and I went to the dentist to try to have it fixed. And the dentist took a look at me and he gasped. And it's never a good thing when a health professional gasps when they're looking at you. And he said, Liam, which of your teeth are you talking about? You've chipped all of your teeth. And he actually thought that I had pancreatic cancer.
Wow.
Thankfully, I didn't. But he said it was from the stress of me grinding my teeth at night, that subconscious stress that I was experiencing. So I realized I had to actually figure something else out, a way to solve this issue. And I didn't have the capital to be able to hire someone in person. So I ended up hiring people remotely and never looked back from that point. That was just a huge game changer for me, which was kind of like a cheat code, which I think actually at this point, ironically, it's no longer a strategic advantage, because now everyone is currently hiring remotely. So you're seeing the salaries in, Asia and South America and Eastern Europe go up by leaps and bounds, because a lot of large corporations now know how to work remotely.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing that necessity creates the best innovations?
Oh yeah, I think when COVID hit, another lesson actually that I got from my supervisor in grad school, who was he was an expert at refugee movements. He sat on the UN board for refugee board of refugee awareness. I can't remember what the name of the board was, but he said, in a refugee situation, the people that move usually survive and the people that stay put die. And whenever we have some type of huge cataclysmic event, the people that pivot very, very quickly are usually the ones that end up winning. And the people that think that the playbook will not change are the people that end up losing. And I think that was a perfect example of COVID. If you held on to all your corporate leases throughout the pandemic, you're not doing too well right now. You should have actually paid attention to the economy moving to a digital format, right? The digitization of the economy in all its forms, and recognizing that this is going to be the future. And whether it comes to e-commerce, or whether it comes to software, or whether it even comes to people, in the case that we've been talking about, everything is going digital. And if you don't pivot very quickly during that time, or if you had not, you're going to unfortunately be left behind. And I think actually people are still not paying attention to that lesson today, because you're seeing a lot of people go back to the office, and they're going back to the office not necessarily because they have any logical reason as to why they should do it. It's just because that's what they've known. And that's a very dangerous way to think.
Yeah, actually, the only constant in life is change itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
Everything else, like people think, oh, I'm going to stay like here forever, especially like people that come from the Industrial Revolution, where they had jobs for 30 years in one company and retired from that company. That's no longer the case. Actually, change is inevitable. Even our bodies changes every day, right?
Right.
So people, if they want to adapt to a new world, they have to get used to change. I write software for a business, and every time we implement a new application in a client's company, it's a huge change. And people always resist it. But then after a few months, they're like, oh my God, what was I doing before this?
Yeah, absolutely.
What has been the biggest obstacle or the biggest problem in your life, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I mean, we could be here for 3 hours. There's plenty of obstacles in my life. I think probably trying to redefine my life after my sports career ended abruptly. That was a major challenge. Changing my identity from someone who was focused on international competition and sport as the core part of their life, and switching to something else. I think that whenever there's a very serious problem that happens to someone, I always tell them, wait 5 years and you'll know that it's probably one of the best things that ever happened to you, which was true for me of my very I guess unimpressive sports career, or the end to my sports career. It was definitely the right direction to go for me. And I would say, I mean, the other part of it was building up the business in a bootstrapped way was very, very difficult. A lot of my friends were going the other direction and raising money, and I didn't raise money. I'm happy that I didn't, but it was a lot more difficult at the beginning than it was at the end. For anyone that doesn't know, I run a couple software as a service companies, which is basically when you pay a subscription for software as opposed to paying for the entire amount up front. And these companies are very slow to start, but once they actually get started, they end up snowballing into very successful businesses that can very easily generate a lot of income and can grow without that much more work injected at the top of those machines. So that was another big one for me that I definitely had to overcome. I remember being, I didn't get, like, we didn't pay ourselves for 3.5 years, as an example, at the beginning of that business, when we could have very easily raised a couple $1 million, probably paid ourselves fantastic salaries, but then I wouldn't have been able to control the business the way that I do today.
Yeah, actually, beautiful point. The first event that set me free in my life was software as a service client. We built their entire application systems as consultants, but they, at the end, they were getting into bankruptcy because they didn't raise any money. And they finally found an angel investor after 7 years into the business, getting no income. And this investor came in, they brought more money. To make the long story short, I got 5% of the business because I was just servicing them without payment. My 5% became 0.001%, but now that company is worth $100 million. And when they sold, it set me free, right?
Right, yes.
But
Yeah,
it took, that company took 20 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah. Well, actually, back to, I mean, Toby with Shopify, they have a $200 billion plus company valuation. And it's the overnight 25-year success, right? It's these companies take time. And a lot of people don't recognize that everyone thinks that these companies just appear. The vast majority of cases, the companies that just appear, that grow super fast, actually also degrade at exactly the same rate. It's a very interesting problem inside of software companies. So if you have a company, I'm thinking of one right now that I invested in, and they're just about to go public, and they were at over 100 million a year in a year and a half. So monumental growth, right? Like very, very fast growing company. But the fear that they have to have is, okay, well, so we're at 100 million in a year and a half. You've got to be at 1 billion in a year and a half to be able to keep that same level of growth happening. Are you going to be able to do that? Probably not, based off of the total addressable market of this particular industry. I think it's actually a very big industry, but it is going to be very difficult to be able to approach that industry at scale. And so it's, those companies that go up really, really quickly, a lot of the times they end up going down. Inside of the book, I talk about WeWork. And I don't know if you know that company, but it's a network of co-working spaces throughout the world. And they were supposed to IPO at, I believe, $50 billion. And they ended up not IPOing. They ended up first reducing their IPO to about $10 billion. And they ended up not IPOing. And their current valuation is, I think, $2 to $3 billion, as an example. But they've had $5 billion invested inside of them. So it's really important to be able to understand growth of companies. I actually think happen organically, as opposed to when you inject capital inside of a business, particularly something like a SaaS business, maybe you can change the architecture of growth by 20%. Like that's how, if you say, hey, I'm going to put as much money as humanly possible, you got a blank check to be able to make whatever you want to happen, you'll probably increase your growth curve by 20% or degrade your drop by about 20%. But fundamentally, these things are pretty organic. And I think, to me, the slower your business grows, the more capital you can extract from it. Because I know it's a counterintuitive look at the way that businesses operate. But if you take 20 years to be able to build a business and you just keep holding on to it, I think it's probably one of the most important assets that you can ever hold on to. I know for us, being a bootstrap company, we see the companies that we have, and some of them are very successful. They produce dividends for me and my business partner, and why would we ever let them go? We see, remote work is going to do pretty well over the next 5 to 10 years. It's definitely going to be a growth market, so we want to stick with that as long as possible.
Of course. One of my mentors, a world-renowned marketer, he said, the fastest way to sell $1 billion is to invest $2 billion in sales and marketing, but then try to maintain that.
Yes.
Right.
Which is, and that's the reality is, I think a lot of the people that we see today, they're looking at the business as, okay, you injected $10 million and you've gone from 1 million in revenue to 2 million in revenue. Well, you spent $10 million, so you've actually lost $8 million to make $2 million. Now, maybe you can make that back in 5 years, because if you're talking about $2 million per year, and as a SaaS business, hey, that does theoretically make sense, but it's a gain that is entirely dependent upon the venture machine still running. And I don't know when this episode is going to come out, but when you think about the current environment that we're in, where we're probably going towards an economic correction or at least stagflation for the next year, from all of the money that the Fed has injected into the economy, the venture market, I wouldn't necessarily count on that for the safety of your business. Now, for someone who's bootstrapped, that has dry powder, right, that has cash in their hand, this is a really exciting time for me, because I can go and buy up those businesses that have real value in them, but at a much lower multiple. During the pandemic, as an example, me and a couple buddies of mine invested in a lot of co-working spaces that were shutting down. But you can go and pick those up for 25 cents on the dollar of what they were pre-COVID. Yeah. And now they're going right back up to that dollar, and they're probably going to be worth $2 to $3 on what the previous price was.
Yeah. Warren Buffett says it all the time, right? When people are panicking, you have to be super aggressive. And when people are aggressive, you have to be, okay, let's hold on.
Actually, I remember in the pandemic, my money manager called me about a week after Trump had put out his announcement, and he was like, dude, you've got all this cash, like, let's go, right? Like, and he called me on probably 2 days off the bottom of the entire market. And I should have paid attention to him, and I should have said, yeah, you know what? We should go now. And I'm realizing it's like, there was literally blood in the streets. And that's when you should invest. That's when you should make those types of decisions. And I didn't do it. I was apprehensive about it. And it's one of those things that I have regretted, because actually a buddy of mine did the opposite. And I think he had an 86% return for his 2020 year, which was insane, because he bought, at the absolute bottom and then popped right back up to the top, which was great. So yeah, I think that when you see those types of situations, and we're not over, like, I think that those problems actually are only now really going to present themselves as the US and the Fed start to slowly come off drugs. Like, if you see the economy, the S&P 500 over the last year and a half, it's entirely due to drug use, right? It's due to people printing money like crazy. Yeah. And now we need to wean ourselves off of that. So we're going to see a lot of transitionary pain, and companies like Apple and Google and Facebook and, these companies that are going down in value, these are market forces, but the value of those actual businesses has not gone down in any way. So whenever there's like a market force drop, that's when you should buy, at least in my opinion. I'm not a financial advisor, nor do I play one on podcasts. So please don't take this as legal advice, but it is definitely one of those things that I look at when you see market forces drop, when you see the price of Apple drop, but not due to a problem that Apple has. Yeah. That's when you should buy Apple.
On sale. It's on sale.
Yeah, right? It's on sale, right? There's a fire sale. It's 25% off. Go pick it up.
Brother, one last question. I'm very conscious of your time, and thank you for being here, by the way. If you had access to a billboard that was the busiest highway on earth, what would you write in it?
Oh, probably something about remote work. I think I would say remote work is no longer a choice. It's been something that has been the mission statement of our companies and myself for the past 20 years, which is we're trying to help the world's transition towards remote work. So even though there might be more important things to say, I think I would stick with the core mission of the company. Yeah, it's no longer a nice to have. It is something that you absolutely must do in order to be successful in the 21st century. And if you don't adapt to that model, you're going to die.
Yes, it's fantastic. It's true, because we come from the idea that we have these countries that were isolated and every country had their own culture. Now we have a global culture. And if you don't
Yes.
realize that, you quickly are going to perish, right? It's global now. The play is global.
Yeah, when I think about Rome and then Constantinople and London and Berlin and New York and San Francisco, where's the next city? I think there's not going to be one. I think the next city is like the digital city. I think that it's the connections that we're creating right now. It's what you're listening to in this podcast. Those are the actual connections. That's the future of being able to interact and collaborate at scale. And that's a very exciting time for, I think, humanity. But again, if you don't adapt to that, you're going to get left behind.
Fantastic, brother. Thank you so much. If people want to reach out, find out about your remote work conference and everything else, where can they find you?
Just go to runningremote.com, where you can pick up all the information about the conference and the book. And then if you can't afford the book or the conference, go to youtube.com/runningremote. And all of our talks are up there for free. Again, we're big on trying to distribute information to as many people as possible.
Beautiful.
So all of our talks are up there for free. Go check them out. And if you have questions, just let me know in the comments.
Beautiful. Liam, thank you so much for being here, brother. My heart goes to you. Our audience is very grateful to have you. And thank you for, enlightening the world with your wisdom and, getting people together remotely, right?
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Blessings. Cheers.
That's all for today's episode of the Break Free Podcast. Head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Starting your own business can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Visit davidmansilla.com to pick up a copy of the #1 international best-selling book, Breaking Out of Corporate Jail. Expand what you consider to be possible and reach your full potential. And join us on the next episode.